Hi there. Hi there. So nice to see you today. This is a South Carolina class, so I want to make sure that you're in the right class. Sometimes people can think that it's a forms class and it might be North Carolina, but just want to make sure you're in the South Carolina class. Is that right for you? Cool. Well, we'll get started in just a little bit. We want to make sure, give everybody a chance to get on here. And I'm going to see if I can start getting the forms up while we're waiting for a couple others to join us. There's Valida. Hey, girl. Let's see now. I tried to get them up before we started, and it looked like it was not going to the right place. So I want to make sure that we get the right place. That doesn't look like it's the right place. Let's try this. Ah, there we go. I see you, or I see your names. I see you and I see the forms. If you cannot see the forms, raise your hand or let me know. So otherwise we'll get started on the forms in a minute or so.
Every now I can see everything fine.
Can you? Oh, good.
Yes,
thank
you.
Thanks, Alita. Oh, good, dear. Oh, I tell you what, these forms sometimes can get lost. You know, for some reason, some of my things come up on Edge and others come up on Chrome. And for some reason, they don't read each other. And I think that's what happens sometimes when I'm trying to attach some forms. They're coming up in the different operating systems, and that's confusing. So, but anyway, it looks like we're on the same page today. I hope so. Anyway, no, Shamish is going to join us in a little while. So, like I said, we'll just give a minute or so, and we'll go for when she gets here. Well, Valida, you're learning a lot about forms in different areas right now, aren't you? You got some business going on in Columbia?
I do, yeah. And unfortunately, we were under contract, but it fell out of contract this morning. The buyer wasn't able, they weren't able to get their funding. So back to the drawing board, but we have we had 4 offers on the house. So we're following up on the other offers and we're waiting on them to come through. One of them said that they would go ahead and resubmit. They have the contracts, and I'm just hoping and praying that that's the case.
Oh, yeah.
Because I do not want to go back to the drawing board.
I know. I know. Oh, you know,
so per usual, it's always something exciting going on.
Yeah, there really is. It's never a dull moment in real estate. And part of the reason it's I guess it keeps you interested for years and years is all the different things that can come up. And you think, well, what is so difficult about just writing a contract and going to closing? But there's a different wrinkle just about in every one of them, something to learn. So as long as
do you ever get used to
it?
Yeah. Do you ever get used to it?
No.
Just that no one, are you okay, but you know it's coming, but it's always
okay. you keep hoping one's gonna work smooth, you know.
That's everybody. I'm gonna continue to hope for that.
yeah, you can, and we all keep hoping for that. Yeah. We really do. But that's part of the excitement of it. It's kind of like watching a football game or a basketball game. You know, we know the game, but there's so many different things that can happen with all the different personalities and all the different aspects of a contract. So it sometimes feels like it should go a little bit differently than you planned, but you just have to be flexible. That's one of the best words I can tell y'all to aim for, is to be flexible as you do your business. But like you said, it certainly will not. You won't get bored. I've been in the business 40 years now. Well, as of next year. And so I can testify for a long period of time and being in different states, and to kind of know learning different states. But I started in Florida back in '83, and actually when Keller Williams was being born out in Texas, I was starting in Florida. But I think Gary Keller makes a little bit more money than me. I don't understand it,
Yeah.
But I wish I had been with Keller Williams from that point on till today. But I came with Keller Williams in '95. So
Oh, wow.
I've been with Keller Williams a long time too. And
Yeah.
then we opened our office in August of 2003. That's actually when I joined Keller Williams. I was with another firm before that here in Charlotte. And then we moved and started the Valentine office down on the first floor in the building where we are now. And now we just moved up to the second floor. So then we took over the whole floor when we went upstairs. So we'd have plenty of room. And then COVID hit. We didn't need all that room, but it still is kind of fun to go up there and get to see everybody now and come back in to meet people face to face. Most of the way I get to meet you is on Zoom, and I really appreciate you all joining me on Zoom and letting me meet you face to face, because I rarely don't come into the office. I usually work at home. I live with my 99-year-old mother, and so I stay home mostly to be available. She does pretty good, and so that's why I work from home. I work on Zoom and work on the laptop and work on the cell phone. So hopefully I can still be available to you. And then of course Tasha's there in the office if you need something. Well, let's get started with some of these forms and see what we've got to do in South Carolina. The first thing you have to do, and this is a little bit unusual, is you have to have the South Carolina forms. And to be able to get the South Carolina forms, you have to be a member of the South Carolina Realtors Association. Now, most of our agents come in as North Carolina agents, and they join Canopy. And when they join Canopy, that's joining the National Association of Realtors, it's joining the North Carolina Association of Realtors, and Canopy Association of Realtors. Those are the three associations that you join when you think you're joining just Canopy. So that allows you to have access to the North Carolina forms because you're a member of the North Carolina Association. Well, when you get your South Carolina license, you don't have to rejoin NAR, National, and you don't have to rejoin Canopy, but you do have to join the South Carolina Association. And I always start with this because that you can't use forms if you can't get to them, right? And you can't get to them without your NAR number. And the NAR number, which is your number in the database of every realtor in the country that's a member of the National Association of Realtors, you have to use that number when you access the forms for the South Carolina Library in DocuSign or in Zip Forms or in Dotloop. Those are your three primary e-signature programs. And you probably have seen DocuSign more because it's the dominant e-signature program in Command. If you've already started learning your forms in Command, you've probably seen the DocuSign. And in order to attach the forms to your number or to your access point, you would have to have the NAR include the South Carolina Association of Realtors. Now, if you need the form, after we get off the call, I'll be glad to email these all the forms today. I'll email them to you. If you'll put your email address in the chat box for me, then I'll just email them to you. But this is the form that you would use to join. There is an online form as well, and I can send that to you. So if you want to use the online, you join the month you join is prorated This month, if you were to join, it would be $50 for the remainder of this year, plus a one-time application fee. So it would be $75. In January, we have to renew our associations annually in the 1st of July, excuse me, 1st of June. No, 1st of January. That's what it's one of those just. January 1, you will get to renew for the full year, and it's $140 a year, but you don't have to pay the $25 again, obviously. On this form, as I mentioned, this is the paper form, and then you would have, if you want to go online, you can do it online. If you send it in, and don't fill out this second part, obviously it's not for the agents. Here is the information you want to. If you don't want to put your credit card information on this, if you email it in, which I recommend you don't, call Lindsay at this telephone number, or you can email her at lindsay@southcarolinarealtors.org, and that give her the information for your fees. That allows you now to get into the forms. So the form that you're going to use most is your South Carolina disclosure of real estate brokerage relationships. That is the South Carolina equivalent of the working with real estate agents that you've learned to use in North Carolina. South Carolina does not refer to it as agency relationships as we do in North Carolina, because they have something called transaction brokerage. Transaction brokerage is a limited service. It's not an agency related service. And consequently, our firm, as did a number of the larger firms, elected not to offer transaction brokerage. We do not do a discounted, a limited service. We're a full service brokerage. We do not work with someone that we do not have an agency relationship with. And so therefore, the reason they call it brokerage relationships is because they do offer a type of relationship that we do not offer. We obviously start, and I love the way they put this, way they design their form, where it says you are a customer of the brokerage firm. That's when you first start with someone. Almost everybody has a concept what customer and client. Yeah, they understand the meaning of it. If nothing else, it's the client relationship of confidentiality with an attorney, the client privileges. So you kind of have a little bit of a understanding just in everyday life from customer and client. So it says you are a customer of the brokerage firm. You can become a client of the brokerage firm, and then it goes to page 2, and it's your choice. That's the premise of this whole form. You start out as a customer, you can become a client, but it's your choice. Okay, let's go back now, and if you look, well, let me show you one thing right here at the bottom. This document is not a contract. This is definitely what you want to point out. This document is not a contract. You see right there, I've highlighted it. You don't have to highlight when you get to somebody, you can, but basically you want to help them to understand that they are not going into a contract with you. This is like your disclosure to them. It's not anything for them to agree to. This is the way we work in Keller Williams Ballentine, the way we work with agents. The way we work, basically, as they start with as a customer, as you can see, here is one of the options, the transaction brokerage. This is something we do not do. So we do not really work with a client. We don't work with a person as a customer, to be honest with you. We want a relationship, and that doesn't mean that we won't show them a property or that we can't be cordial and friendly, but you don't owe them any of your fiduciary duties. If they are a customer, it's totally fine if you want to give them some information, but do not gather information from them, like any motivation as to why they're buying or their financial stability. Can they buy? That's what happens when you become a client. So you want to go on down to the next section and talk to them about becoming a client. And the way a seller or a buyer becomes a client, they go into an agency relationship. Right here are the types of agency relationships that we work with. We work in the single agency, we work in dual agency, we work in disclosed dual agency, and we work in designated agency. As you can see, I highlighted right up the top here. If you go into any of these agency relationships, this is the client level services. You're going to have obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable skill and care. Those are your fiduciary duties that you learned in pre-licensing school. And if you go into the agency relationship, that would be how you would work with a client, all right? In a single agency, you're basically working just with that client on one transaction. There's no other aspect of the firm being in that transaction other than you are working in a single agency. You can go into what's called dual agency. That's where in your dual agency, there would be you would be the seller. It might be the seller and the buyer. You might represent both. You can represent the seller, you can represent the buyer, which is called dual agency. Then the disclosed dual agency is obviously what's going to happen when you disclose to them that you have now entered into a situation that you need their agreement. And I'm going to talk about much more in detail as we get into the agency agreement. But right now, just explain to them that you can work representing a seller and a buyer in the same transaction. You can work with one party in the transaction, or you can work in something called designated agency, whereas you would totally represent them, even though you allow the firm to be a dual agent, and we would bring somebody else in the firm to represent the other party. So now it comes down, it's your choice. This is their choice. They can choose to remain a customer, but you can't represent them. They could hire you or the brokerage firm. They could hire them through a written agency agreement, which is the way we work with people. And if the firm is represented, then they can decide if they want to do the disclosed dual agency and or designated agency. So you want to get their signature right here that you've gone over this with them, right? That's all it is. They're not agreeing to anything. They're saying, yes, this person disclosed to me what's on this form. Okay, you don't have to sign it. It's basically something that goes in your file. And if the Real Estate Commission ever gets a complaint against you, then we have to provide this form just like you would do with the work with real estate agents in North Carolina. So it's very important that you have that. All right. Now, this little area, this little form here is where it's putting it in writing, the that you what you have to, that you have to disclose that to them, and you want to give what they call a meaningful explanation. In other words, a little bit more than reading it to them, but by and large, you're just going through what's written on there. Now the next one here, this is a little cheat sheet, and I gotta tell you, I'm the one to put it together, and I keep it up to date, but I keep one by at my desk all the time, because the names of the forms in South Carolina sometimes don't correlate in my mind as to what the names of the forms are in North Carolina. For instance, the sales agreement in North Carolina, it's called offer to purchase and contract. In South Carolina, it's called agreement to buy and sell. And it's like, when I hear the title, it makes sense to me, but when I'm trying to figure out what form to use and correlating it to my North Carolina brain, it has helped me to have this little cheat sheet. There's about 3 or 4 pages here, and all the forms that are in this gray area, that's the listing forms. Then we have 2 pages of buyer forms. as you can see up here, here, the working with real estate agents disclosure. I just told you the comparable form to that would be the South Carolina disclosure of real estate brokerage relationships, right? So you've got a number of forms that would be used with sellers. The ones on the right side are the South Carolina forms that correlate to the North Carolina. I do update these as South Carolina changes their forms. They do not have a pattern of when they're going to change. If they change, like this last change happened June the 13th in 2022. So I changed it then. Well, then North Carolina always changes their forms in July 1. Every year we have changes of forms of some sort. It might be formatting or it might be content, but they always have changes in in July. So that's why you see right here, July 2022. That's the most recent changes that have been made. And what I do on this form is to give you the form number and give you the most recent version. And you know, we really, really stress the importance of using the current version, because using a version that's outdated could cause you to lose if you did go into a lawsuit, because you'd be using the wrong form. So using the current version of the forms is very, very important. And you'll hear me say that more than once, I promise you. But just know that we do try to keep these forms updated so that you will have the most current ones, okay? Whether it's North or South Carolina or MLS. Every now and then the MLS changes on us too. So there's all your forms that you would need to know the forms names. Now, this is a listing. Today we'll be talking about the South Carolina listings. And this is a checklist that you can print out. You can use this one. You can use the one that's online in Command. There's a number of checklists that people use, but this is the one that we have chosen to give you some guidance. Again, it's a tool for you. If you find it helpful, use it. If you don't, it's okay too. This is not a requirement to use. It's a tool and hopefully a resource for you. The first step when you start using a checklist, these forms right here, most of these forms would be needed to be turned in within 3 days to the office. When you do a South Carolina disclosure brokerage relationships, you can put it in your file, or you can put it in a folder on your computer. Then you're going to need to have your listing agreement, and along with a listing agreement, you may or may not have these other documents, and we're going to talk about those as we go through this. But if you do have a listing agreement and you do have these documents, then you're going to put it in MLS. So you're going to have the MLS data sheet. So all of these things that are applicable to your listing need to be turned into the office within 3 days. And when you're entering them in Command, there's a button over the top right hand side that says submit for review. That's when you submit for review, so that Carla, who heads up our compliance group, she has a chance to look at it for you and hopefully help you in some way. Then the second section is what we call the second step. These are forms that you might use as you go through the listing process. So you might want to make sure that you are familiar with these forms. They do not have to be turned in within 3 days. I highly recommend that you have them, but they're not as required as these initial ones. Now down here, you're probably going to get hopefully get an offer. And so you're going to have a listing sale. It's not going to be just a listing folder. And in Command, if you have the listing, there's also listings or itemized an items itemized checklist where you also put the sale information in that same opportunity. You don't set up a separate one. So you would want to make sure that you have your sale documents. And again, these are kind of tells you when you would use which forms. And if you're looking at one form, it jogs your memory that you might need another one. All right, so hopefully that'll help you. Again, it's just a checklist and hopefully will be helpful to you. Now, this is your listing agreement in South Carolina. It's called exclusive right to sell agreement, listing agreement. And let's look at the number down here. It's 220. Now, once you make a mental note or put it somewhere in writing, do not use Form 210. Use Form 220, like I've asked you to do on the checklist. And remember, what do you remember from pre-licensing, the difference in exclusive right to sell and exclusive agency? It's confusing because you'd think, well, I'm going into an agency agreement. Why wouldn't I have an exclusive agency? Because an agency agreement only ensures that you get paid if you bring the buyer. Very few of us ever bring the buyer to our listings. We are trying to get somebody to come. That's what MLS is all about, right? But if you don't bring the buyer, you don't get paid. The seller can pay it himself. He can, I mean, not pay, he can sell it himself, which then he doesn't pay you or he doesn't pay anybody. So an exclusive agency agreement is not what you want. What you want is an exclusive right to sell. That means no matter who sells it, who brings the buyer, who whether a buyer's agent or the seller may identify a buyer, you get paid. So the agency agreements that we want to call exclusive right to sell agency agreement, you want to make sure you have the right employment agreement, because you definitely want to get paid. Now, occasionally you'll have an investor that you work with, and they rarely will sign an exclusive right. They typically want an exclusive agency. As long as that's what you agree to, that's up to you. If you agree that they can work with numbers of people and you can, I don't think you're going to work too hard for them if you know several people are working for them, but know that that form primarily is used with investors, exclusive agency. You're going to, again, remember 220, exclusive right to sell agreement, listing agreement. Now, when you go into a listing agreement, it says here that in consideration of the covenants herein contained, the owner's name, and I would be real careful to know if they do own the property. And the way you know that they own the property, other than ask them, would be to look up a deed, try to find a deed on their website. These days, it's so easy to get deeds. Years ago, it was hard for us to ever get a copy because sometimes sellers didn't even know where they were. But you can find deeds and find out who actually owns a property. And then the next blank would be the firm name. This is Keller Williams Ballentine area. It does not have to say Keller Williams Ballentine area Shamice Evans. It doesn't have to have your name on it at all, because it's not with you as an individual. This is an agency agreement that's with the firm. So you want to make sure who owns it, and you want to make sure that it's with the firm. Now, let me talk to you just a minute about the ownership. Other than looking up for a deed, sometimes you'll have an entity seller. You won't have an individual's name. You might have a trust. You might have an estate. You might have an LLC. You might have a corporation. Okay, so if you're going to have an entity, that entity can be the seller, but the entity has to have a person who signs on behalf of that entity. So if it's, let's say it's an LLC, If it is an LLC, then you want to ask the one who is apparently has the authority to sign, that they're talking to you about it. Ask them for a copy of their the directions in the LLC documents that gives them the authority to sign. You're going to have that for the attorney, and you actually need it for the office too, because we've had a number of situations one-on-one right now. Lord have mercy. It's an estate. It's in South Carolina. There's 3 probates that are going to have to be done before we can sell it. It's gone through 3 generations, and now found out that there was an error in one of the initial probate. So they're having to go back and redo it, and it's a mess. So had the agent known or been diligent to get the information from the seller, maybe we could have saved a little bit of time for this buyer, but maybe not, but as the attorney actually found it, it wasn't anything we could find actually. So anyway, so you want to make sure that the person who says they have the right to sell it, try to get something in writing if they do. Now, South Carolina, again, is they do things, and I say they, not being disrespectful. It's basically, it's we, because we are South Carolina agents too, but it's for us to differentiate the one we'd use most. The first line here, it says, for the period of time beginning on, and I use these dates, October the 15th, 2021. Now, you can't have a contract if you don't have a beginning date and an end date. So I wanted to do this form, this listing from October the 15th, 2021 to the end of February, February the 28th, 2022. Now, in South Carolina, the October 15th date does not have to be the date that the listing agreement is executed. It can be a little bit delayed. So if you, let's say you did the contract or the listing agreement on October 7th, but the seller needed a few more days to get the mailbox painted and whatever else they were going to do to get the house ready, but you couldn't sell it during that period of time, or you couldn't market it, but you could keep it like a ghost, as we call it, a ghost listing. You don't tell anybody about it, but you can have a few days delay, and you don't want it to be months delay, but you could have a few days there before you actually start doing any type of marketing. All right. Now let's talk about what happens when October the 15th comes along. You've been quiet about your listing. You've been about your business, getting pictures probably and measurements or whatever. Now, on the 15th, that date, it's going to go into one of 2 statuses in MLS. It's going to go active on October the 15th, or it's going to go in what's called coming soon, no show. It's going to go in MLS, which is marketing, and you're going to go in one of those 2 statuses. Now, if you're not going to do active, you must have another form, and that form is called coming soon, no show. Now, let me show you it. It's an MLS form that you're going to need to have filled out. There it is. This is the form that authorizes you to put it in MLS, but not to do any other form of advertising unless you add the term coming soon. You can put a sign in the yard as long as you have a rider that says coming soon. You can put it on Facebook as long as you say coming soon. The main thing is that you're exposing it to the market, but the reason that you're saying coming soon is that while it's in that status in the MLS, there cannot be any showings. You can have pictures in there. You can have all your 36 or 45, ever how many pictures you can put in there now. You can put all the pictures in there so that people actually can see inside as far as pictures go. They just cannot go in the front door. So, or side door. Do not let sellers let a neighbor in. Do not let sellers let the painter in who then will let somebody in. It is a no-show, and it's your obligation to make sure the sellers understand that, or guess who gets fined $1,000? Right there it is. It may not be shown. If it is shown and reported, there's $1,000 fine. And yes, we've had 2 agents in the last year and a half since this has been policy that have been fined $1,000. Of course, they said it wasn't their fault, but anyway, they got fined. So you want to make sure that if it's in the coming soon status in MLS, there are no showing appointments, and showing time does actually block off those times. So they're not making appointments. It's usually happens with someone who knows somebody and gets in. Yes, we have had a lot of contracts presented sight unseen. They are during the coming soon no show status. They the market has been so tight and so fast the last few months. It was nothing to have an offer come in, and actually we've even seen multiple offers come in. Who in the world would buy a house not seeing it? But yes, there were people who did it. I do not think you're going to be seeing that right now. Our market is balancing out a little bit, and so you're not going to have that temptation, I don't think, to have to deal with, or issue to have to deal with. Make sure that the seller understands. Again, I've highlighted some of these things, but you want to make sure that your seller, whether it's North Carolina or South Carolina, understands what's happened if it's shown. Now, right here, this marketing date, when you put it in MLS on that October the 15th, there is going to be a date that you remove the coming soon, and that's when it goes public marketing without any coming soon notation or any rider. You can take the rider off the sign, whatever that date is. And often it's, maybe 10 days or maybe 5 days. It's up to you and the seller, how many days you want it in that category. So whatever date is right here, that's the date that is going to be active in MLS. And when it goes active, it's broadcast, it's syndicated, it's out to all the public, not just the MLS members. Now, the active date on this form is also input in the listing. So when you put all the data into the listing, make it coming soon, there is a field and they call it marketing date in the field. So that's consistent with this date, that's active date on this form. All right, so you don't want to, you want to make sure that that's solid in your mind when that is active and marketing date. Now, they want the sellers ready to read this stuff, so they have them do initials on every paragraph. But now on the bottom here for signatures, there's a property address. Make sure you put that in there. Get the seller's signatures. You're going to sign it as the listing agent. And looky here, who is the member participant? That's not you. You would think it might be you, but because you are a member of Canopy, but actually that's the broker in charge of the firm. So I would need to sign that one. So when you do your listing package, when you put it in your e-signature program, DocuSign or whatever, you send it out. You can order the signatures, put the signatures in the order of the sellers, then you, and then me, or you can sign it first. The main thing is you want to get it signed, get them to sign it, then I can sign it, having seen that they have agreed. You don't send it to me just carte blanche and want me to sign it. I'm not going to do it. So you want to make sure that you get the seller signatures, your signatures on it, and then I can sign it. So we would want you to have that to me within the one day that you're going to put it in the MLS. But that is not as critical as another form I'm going to show you in a few minutes on Firm Exclusive. Okay, but I'll tell you about that later. So this is your form on coming soon. Now let's go back up to our listing agreement. Oops, went too far. So on October the 15th, we've got it in MLS, and right now we're going to do coming soon, right? And let's say on the 22nd of October, which is the active date on the coming soon form, it will automatically go active because you put that October 22nd date in there. So you don't have to go back in and change it from coming soon to active. It'll automatically go. Now, right here, we don't use plats that much in North Carolina, and they don't in South Carolina. You might know if you're looking at the legal description, it's probably going to start with an L, which you know is a lot number. You may not be able to divide out the block and section. That's okay if you don't, but make sure you put the lot number. The subdivision, you will know the subdivision from the seller, but when you're doing a listing agreement, you also want to make sure you have the tax record on this particular property. You should have it in hand when you're filling out the agreement. And right here, tax map number, that's what is referred to in South Carolina as the parcel ID. Property ID, parcel ID, tax map, these are all consistent to the same number. So the parcel ID is the one you're going to enter in MLS, and it's generally it's numbers. Sometimes it might have some letters in it, but that would be the map number for that particular property, and that's where you're going to confirm and verify the legal address of the property and where it's located. Sometimes the name on the tax record is not the same. Like maybe see, the name of the person looks like they own it. It does. Do you know the tax record? It's not required that the person's name on the tax record be the owner. I didn't know that until after I'd been in real estate 40 years. No, not quite. It's whoever's paying the bill. So most of the time it is the owner, but you can't not just rely on the name in the tax records, but that's a beginning. Okay. Now let's look at this next little section here. I've got to tell you, this one really amazes me. When you're selling a property, we are taught that there are certain things that are fixtures, and there's probably 40 things listed in the North Carolina listing agreement and offer to purchase. In South Carolina, they have one word for fixtures. It's fixtures. It's like, well, what in the world is a fixture? What has to stay with just one word, fixtures, So the broker in charge down at the Fort Mill office, Calhoun's office, had their attorney do us a little addendum, and so we now have a fixtures addendum and itemizing a lot of things so that the seller knows that what the buyer is going to expect to be left, and the seller can tell you what he's going to leave and what he's not going to leave. Okay. I'll show you that form. That's an in-house form, so I'll show that to you. Just a minute. It's down here too. If I were you, I would be using it. In the last 3 days, I've had 2 issues come up over fixtures in the contract. One of them came up because the buyer's agent, and this irritates the fool out of me. The buyer's agent put something in there called, wait a minute. He put all appliances. What does that mean? All appliances? Well, where's my form? When you say all appliances, you have something in your mind, but it's not specific. It doesn't really tell you what needs to be in there. Can't find my pictures addendum. I'll find it. So don't ever use the word all unless you're going to say all including something. You need to itemize it. You need to be specific what you expect. The buyer expected to have a washer and dryer as part of appliances. How many sellers think that they're going to leave the washer and dryer as part of appliances? They look at as appliances as what's in the kitchen, you know, and obviously appliance could possibly be an oven. It could be a mixer. It could be a can opener. There are a lot of things that are appliances. So be real cautious and don't use that word all when, you know, if you're representing as the buyer, and if you're a seller and you get that, you make sure that you specify and ask them, what do you mean? There's my pictures addendum. I knew I had it in there somewhere. This is a list, and as you can see, it looked very much like the one in North Carolina. If you are doing the listing, which is what we're doing now, check listing here, and the seller is going to agree that all of these things stay. If these things do not stay, there's a section over here. If they do not intend to convey them with their property, you need to itemize them. And in the illustration I just gave you a moment ago, just to be clear, you could put washer and dryer, or you could put refrigerator. That's the thing that most people argue about. This one happened to be arguing about a washer and dryer. Things that are leased, like a fuel tank. There are a number of different homes that have propane tanks, more or less for gas logs. They may or may not heat the house. It may be for gas logs, but they're rarely owned. They're most often leased. So, and like a security system may be owned or a part of the house, or it could be leased, but more often it's the service that they're paying for. So if you'll be specific right here with the listing, then when you put the MLS, put the listing in MLS, there's a place for exceptions. An exception in this situation would be whatever they've got named here. They're not going to leave the refrigerator. That's an exemption or exception. So if you'll use that little form, it will help you help the seller to know what they're supposed to leave and not walk out the door with it. And then we get into a conflict after closing. Okay, let's go back up here to your listing agreement. Oh, one, I was going to give you an illustration. One of the teachers has taught South Carolina forms for many years. She said the way she describes or teaches fixtures, she said, if you can turn the house upside down, anything sticks is a fixture. Anything that falls out is not a fixture. And I said, well, that gives you a mental picture anyway. I don't know if it's definitive, but it does give you a mental picture. Okay, now the next thing here, this is the section where the seller will initial that you went over with them, the real estate brokerage relationship forms that we started with. That's where they initial right there, in addition to having signed that form. Now, this little section here is very important. And again, it's different from your North Carolina forms. In your North Carolina forms, it's the dual agency and designated agency is agreed to up front, and it's agreed to in the agreement, the agency agreement itself. Not so in the South Carolina. You have two separate addendum. But right here on the listing agreement, you want to help the seller to understand that you will come back to them if you get in the scenario of a dual agency or designated agency, and you will show them this form. Now, I generally like to show them the form at this point so that it makes more of a mental picture to them when I ask them to consider it. You see right here, it said the permission to act as a dual agent will not be considered. If they just strictly do not want dual agency, then you can't offer dual agency in MLS. In the company remarks, you want to make a note in company remarks, dual agency is not considered by the seller. All right. Or it may be considered by the seller. Now, this is what we really prefer. Permission to act as a dual agent may be considered at the time I am provided with information about the other party to the transaction. If the owner agrees, owner will execute a separate written dual agency agreement. Same thing with designated. Now, let me show you those forms. Let's see. I saw them a minute ago. There it is. This is your dual agency form. If you are doing an open house, and obviously you're representing your seller, the buyer comes in and they love the house and they want to write an offer on it. But you would like to think that's why you did the open house, right? That doesn't often happen, but it does happen sometimes. And if you are in that scenario, then you would go back to your seller who said they would consider it. Then you would take this form. This is your dual agency form. Explains it in detail and with all the legalese, so that you can go over what it means for the broker to be dual agent and what it means for the seller and the buyer. Then they sign that. Then the buyer would sign that, because the buyer is going to also have to agree on the buyer agency agreement to be a dual agent. Okay, the seller has to agree to it. The buyer in the buyer's agency agreement would say that they agree to consider it. So when they consider it, then here is where they would sign it. And again, right here, oh, what did I do there? I don't have, okay, they would put Keller Williams Valentine here, and you, as the associate licensee, can sign it. Now, the one we see used most, we don't see this one used very much, to be honest with you. This is the one we see used most, and this is your designated agency. This is where you know that the firm is going to be the dual agent, but your seller or your buyer wants you to represent them exclusively. Then we designate someone else to do the opposite role. And again, we have a lot of agents and we have a lot of listings. So it's not unusual that let's say you're the listing agent, since we're talking about listings today, and another one of our agents brings the buyer. They come in to the open house, or they have previewed the house and they want to bring you an offer. They know by the MLS listing that you are a Keller Williams Valentine agent. Then what they want to do is to use this designated agency form, come back on the back page. Again, that's just the explanation of designated agency. Right here, the associated licensees, supervisory broker is my name, obviously as the big broker of the firm. And if let's say Shamice is working as a listing agent for the seller, Valita is going to be working with the buyer. So you're going, as Valita is going to fill this out, and she's going to put her name here. She's going to get Shamisha's name from MLS, and she knows my name. All right. So when she presents the offer, Valita is going to present the offer to Shamish. And when she presents it, it's going to be signed by the buyer. And down here, it's going to be signed by Shamish, but she's the one that she wrote the offer. All right. So be Keller Williams and Shamish's name here, the buyer's name's here, with our names filled in here. So when Valita gets this this offer, then she immediately talks to her seller to see if they would consider, not only consider, agree to designated agency with the two agents representing their respective clients. And obviously, I don't know that anybody ever disagrees with that. Sometimes they don't know whether to agree to somebody they don't know. But most of the time, the sellers then will sign this, and then they will look at the offer. So just remember the pattern. It's the buyer's agent that writes the offer. The buyer's agent must remember to put the designated agency agreement with it and put all of our names up here before it's presented to the seller. Okay. Now let's go back up here to the listing agreement. All right, so as I told you, I often will give them a copy or tell them that's what I want to bring back to them, but I like to prepare them that they don't sign that until they get into the scenario. Now we're going to go to number 2, the terms. Again, this is where you get confirmation of how much you're going to get paid for, for selling the property. And you get the confirmation from the seller how much they're willing to sell it for. So this is an unusual way of writing out the sales price, but this is where you write it out. It's like writing out a check. You're going to write it out in word form, and then here you're going to do it in numeric form. Okay. And in return for selling it, the owner agrees to pay the broker a total. Watch that word total. Do not agree to an amount on just your side. You want to have the total fee. We do not work fee for service. So we are going to, beside a dollar amount, we're going to put NA or 0, or a total commission of a percentage. Most, well, like I said, we don't do fee for service, so it has to be a percentage. For years, and I don't know if any of y'all have been in business many, many years like me, but for years it was 6%, 3% to the buyer's agent, 3% to the listing agent. Well, those of you who've been in business now for the last year or two, you're not seeing that as much anymore. That's not what you would say acceptable in the marketplace. The marketplace has shifted, and more often than not, you're going to see the buyer's agency agreement offered. What I'm seeing most now is 2.5%. I still see 3%, but not predominantly. 2.5 is probably the more common one, and 2 might even be in some scenarios. As the market has begun to shift a little bit, I think we're going to see some shift there. But just be aware that you've got to discuss with the seller that the total amount, and out of them, that total amount, you're going to share with a cooperating broker, and it's listed on this next page right here. There's a percentage right here. See this where it says buyer agency? That is the only one we're going to cooperate with, and it's going to be a percentage. It is not a dollar amount. We do not do transaction brokerage, which is a non-agency limited service, whether it's percentage or dollar. We do not do that. And we do not work with an agent who is a sub-agent of another firm. You are the sub-agent of this seller, you and this firm. You are the one that has the right to represent your seller fully. A sub-agent coming from another firm is not going to understand or know enough about your property to represent your seller. So we do not do sub-agency. So the only thing you're going to offer to a cooperating broker would be a buyer agency, a buyer's agent. And in the illustration I used a moment ago, you might even put 2.5% here. So if you're going to give 2.5% to a cooperating broker, you can still ask for 6% here. You would make 3.5%. Sometimes the listing agent is thinking that they are one that's bearing quite a bit of expense. With nowadays, you just don't want to put a listing in without professional photography, and you've got to get it professionally measured. So you're right off the bat, you're several $100s into investment in the property. So if the seller is agreeable to that, then that's what you're going to put. Sometimes the seller said, well, why would I give 2.5 to the person who's buyer's agent? Why can't I just give you 2.5? That's acceptable as well, because remember, commissions are negotiable. And so it's up to you to help the seller to agree to whatever the total amount is, out of which you will pay the buyer's agent. Now, again, that's listed here. This down here, this is what's called a protection period. It basically is to establish a boundary with the seller. And it was designed earlier on to keep a for sale by owner, or keep a seller from becoming a for sale by owner, and then sell it to a buyer that you brought to see the house. Because sometimes buyers will watch and see how long it's been on the market, and they think they'll wait until it expires and then they can get a better deal. And so it was designed in that scenario. So you want to make sure that if that were to be the case, you want to make them wait a long time. You don't want to make it wait 15 days, make them wait 60 days or 90 days. But again, you can put any number in there that you want. I can't say that this one has an awful lot of teeth. It gives you legal grounds to be paid commission, but it probably will cost you as much as you might make. So like I said, it's not as strong as we'd like it, but it does establish a boundary. It gives you the chance to talk to the seller that it's not acceptable for the seller to let it expire or terminate, and then them go try to sell it to somebody that you showed the property to. Now, if they are going to go list with somebody else, the new listing agreement would supersede and you don't have a leg to stand on. Oh, let me show you this right here. South Carolina does not have an additional signatures addendum. So what they did, they extended the number of blanks or initials and for signatures. So instead of 2 owners, you have 4 owners now. And then right here would be where you would sign this, okay? Now that's on every page, obviously, and the signatures are 4 lines now for buyers or for sellers. Earnest money. Earnest money is a real bear in South Carolina. Back in 2017, the lawmakers changed a lot of our contracts in South Carolina to remove the phrase that says, and the earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer or shall be released to the seller. They took every reference. There were 7 references, I think. They took them all out. Now, the only way earnest money is released is by mutual agreement of the parties or by court order. That's what this is right here. You see where it's bold and capitalized? It's so hard for buyers and sellers not to think that the contract, they don't care if the contract's terminated. They just want to know who gets the earnest money back. And if they don't agree, then it has to go to court. And when it goes to court, then the judge tells them what they're gonna do. So you have a hard time. I got to tell you, that's some of your toughest negotiations, is to get the release of the earnest money to the party who it appears it should go to, but just make sure that they know that. These are some of the other things that obviously that your broker's duties. You read these things, highlight the things that are important to you, or highlight the things and help find out what's important to them, or the duties that you have. Right here is a list, a list of things that you expect from them. And by and large, you expect them to work with you exclusively. You are committing to work with them exclusively, and you anticipate them working with you exclusively. All right. Now, this little blank right here, if I were you, I would put an NA there. And I'll tell you why. That was, every now and then people are out of the country, and maybe they can't pay the yard person, or they can't they can't pay the electrician, and maybe somebody needs to get the electricity turned back on, and they'll ask the agent to do it. In this day and time, with all the electronic means of conveying money, you don't need to take on that responsibility. They can Venmo or Zelle all they want to, but if I were you, I wouldn't take on the responsibility of paying a bill while somebody's out of the country or in country. So that's what that's for. And again, I would just recommend NA. I come down here. the property information or the disclosure statement, we're going to go through that in just a minute. The title of the form down in South Carolina is the residential property condition disclosure, where in North Carolina, it is the residential property and owners association disclosure. Okay. So, but I'll show you that in just a moment. But basically it's, this is just a paragraph about that. Now, here is a section that changed in May of 2020. Yes, right at the beginning of COVID, the clear cooperation policy, and you've heard me talk about it on the North Carolina forums, I'm sure. The clear cooperation policy is, the intent was to make sure that everybody did share the information about their properties in MLS, and not to have what they call pocket listings. And then they become known as in-house listings. They are, that is what the clear cooperation policy was trying to avoid. They wanted that not to be part of the real estate. Apparently it was more predominant in some areas than others. I don't know that we ever had an issue with it, but apparently across the country there was problems. So they came up with the idea of, the policy says that every listing that you take within 1 business day must be entered into MLS. Every listing must be entered as active in MLS. Then they gave us an exception, except coming soon. And we talked about that a little bit earlier, and I showed you the coming soon form. So now it is extended to say it is going to need to come in, be an MLS within 1 business day, either as active or coming soon. All right. So we have that coming soon agreement. And then in the coming soon agreement, there is the active date. It's called the marketing date, right? So if that's the way your seller is going to want to put their listing out to be sold, then you're going to have your seller to initial right here. These words I added. These words aren't in there. Those are just notes for us. So your option 1 is for the multiple listing service. This is where your seller is going to agree, either active or coming soon. And if there's a coming soon, that form is the form I showed you a while ago. And I'll show you in a minute where it's going to be listed. Okay. Now, there is something else. There is another form. This is a form that our MLS calls firm exclusive. The option it's called option 2 in South Carolina. In the North Carolina form, it's called office exclusive. That's where they have allowed the seller to have the right to sell just with that one firm. And if they are allowed, it is for the purpose of confidentiality and privacy, according to the clear cooperation policy. I have not seen that play out in the marketplace as much, but that's the way it was designed. So now if your seller does not want his listing in MLS at all, then you cannot obviously use the coming soon or active. You can't use that option. You're going to need to use what's called firm exclusive agreement, or option 2. Then your seller would initial here. Now let me show you the form that you're going to be using. It looks a lot like your coming soon. It's the same design, obviously, because it was designed by Canopy. It's called firm exclusive. The main thing is on this one that I need to help you to be mindful of. You're going to fill in this information right here, the address, seller's name up here, the address, and right here the name of the brokerage, which would be Keller Williams Ballantyne area. Now coming over on the second page, this again tells the fact that it's not going to be advertised. You cannot put a sign in the yard. You cannot even talk to a broker in another firm. If you talk to another broker in another firm, it has to immediately go into the MLS as active to be exposed to all brokers if you expose it to one broker of another firm. Now, you can certainly and would be expected to make it known to the brokers in our firm and Keller Williams Valentine. So a firm exclusive is not as detrimental to a seller that signs with Keller Williams Valentine's, because we have so many agents you can expose it to. But you and I both know that their best exposure is MLS. And so what this form basically reinforces that they're going to have a better response in most situations to have the broader exposure to all the MLS. And they want the sellers to initial that you've talked to them about that. So again, you've got several places for the seller to initial. Now let me show you this right here. The seller does or does not authorize the listing brokerage to enter the listing into the MLS system as a comp sale once it's closed. We have to have that checked. We have to have their initials, but we have to have a check mark. Can you put it in MLS as a comp sale once it's closed? Sometimes people don't want it in the MLS at all. And again, that's really the way it was designed at first, is they do not want it in MLS. It will be in tax records, but they want less public knowledge of their transaction. And they can choose to do that. If they do not mind you putting it in once it's closed and they're not having to show the property and people know their house is on the market or whatever, that protected their privacy. And once it's closed, if they don't mind, obviously they'll give you the permission to do so. Now, let me tell you the next thing. That's critical right there. The other critical thing is this right here. You're getting the seller signature. This time it asks for your name, and then you sign it here. But here is where I have to sign it. Again, signature of the brokerage member participant. I have to sign this. Now, the time crunch on this is, remember I told you the other things are supposed to be done within 1 business day. If it's a firm exclusive, you have 2 business days to get it to me. Again, order the signatures with me being the last one. I have to submit this to MLS in a database. I have to tell them if the seller does or does not want it. And I have to give them the address of the property and the seller's name. It doesn't go to anybody else other than the compliance department at MLS. So that if someone calls and complains something about the sale, they already have it in their database that our firm does have a firm exclusive on it. So keep in mind, I have to have it within 2 business days so that I can submit it in that time frame to MLS, or we can get fined on it. So you don't want to submit this to me the day before you go to closing. It ain't going to happen. Okay. So let's make sure to remember that I have to sign both of these forms. The first one we keep in the office, but this one I have to give information to MLS and they can check us on the time. Okay. So keep that in mind. All right. Now let's go back up here to our listing agreement. And that's number 10. It's almost to the end of our listing agreement. One of the things you'll see in this one, or here's where we put it here. If you're going to do firm exclusive, now, if you have either one of those agreements, you need to come down here to, I think it's 28. Yeah, right here. If you have either one of those, or your fixtures addendum, it says here, other terms and conditions. This is where you list addendas, and it I don't know of too many other addendas you might have that unless you have an attorney drafted addendum. Sometimes you have an attorney drafted addendum. we saw that more when, early on, when say a person didn't want to sell their house and didn't want to show it, or there was different sort of scenarios. On the listing side, you don't see very many addendas other than these three. Okay, and now on this page, there's not any blanks on this page other than this lockbox. We have to have the seller's permission really to put a lockbox on their house. And I just want to encourage you, do not use combo locks. That is so unsafe, and it's just not a good idea. All right, use your Supra iBoxes on particularly homes that are occupied. A home that's vacant, it's not a safety issue. It might be a property issue, but particularly if it's occupied, use a Supra iBox and, borrow one, and you'll eventually get a stock of them for sure. But I would just encourage you to use that type of a lockbox. Sometimes after it goes under contract, you might switch it from the Supra iBox to a combo box, because you're going to have inspectors, or you're going to have some contractors sometimes that you might want to make it easier for them to get in. But again, I just caution you if the property is occupied. The one right here, the owner understands that the broker's responsibility to present offers to purchase to the owner for the owner's consideration terminates at the closing of the subject property or expiration of this agreement, whichever comes first. When you reach the end of the term, if you haven't sold the house, your responsibility to that owner is over. All right. Or if it closes, your responsibility to that owner is over. Now, I have seen it happen, which I think is awfully nice. Sometimes in MLS, if it's already expired, another agent might call you as the listing agent, even though it has expired. They still will call you and give you the opportunity to go back and talk to the seller. It doesn't mean you can't extend that, but right now it's basically saying you got to get out of the way, unless that other agent does involve you, and that hopefully the seller will agree. One of the things Shamice asked me earlier, and thanks for bringing it up on this, because I want to tell y'all, when you need to change anything on a listing agreement or any agreement in South Carolina, their attorneys would prefer that you use the original and mark through and initial and date the change. Let's say in this situation is what made me think about it again. Let's say the term on page 1 was, remember, we were going to expire it on February the 28th, 2022. If you wanted to extend that, then you would go back and mark through to 28, 2022, and let's put it out to May 15th, 2022, whatever date you move it out to. Then, even though it had expired, it will pick up and you can still extend it beyond that. And therefore you can work with that agent that was nice enough to call you and let you work with it if the seller agrees. So the seller would have to initial it, extending that date. And on the listing agreement, you would be the one who signed it again. Okay. We do not have an agreement to amend. We do not have a form that, like the agency agreement 710, which is a really good agreement. We do not have that in South Carolina. Like I said, they anticipate you'll just mark through and initial and date it. Okay. I have this fear. I don't like touching the original, but apparently they're okay with it. They being the attorneys who draft these forms. Okay, let's come down here. Photography. The seller irrevocably conveys any and all the seller's audio, photography, and videography rights and perpetuity involving the seller, seller's family, and seller's property to the broker for marketing and advertising and any other purpose deemed necessary by the broker. Well, that's a strange little paragraph there. What we're told by copyright laws is that the photographers own the rights to the photography. Now, it could very well be that the seller gave you some photography. Maybe they gave you some pictures they want you to use. And if they gave it to you, then it's their, this is applicable. But keep in mind, if you pay for photography, which most of you are doing now, be sure and be in communication with that photographer, how, to what degree you can share those photographs. Some of them will only let you use it that one time. Other people give you free carte blanche. So you want to make sure with the photographer what rights and how far you can spread that photography. Okay. Surveillance. This is another thing I think is an unusual way of expressing it. You have to get the seller's permission to disclose to potential purchasers that there is surveillance equipment in the house. I do not quite understand that, but it's in your contract. So you do have to bring it up to the seller. I don't know why a seller would not want someone to know there's surveillance equipment in the house. But if there is, you need to have his permission to disclose it. Again, I told you there's 4 place owners, 4 signature spots for 4 owners, not 2 here. And again, down here, you're going to have the owner's mailing address, which may or may not be the property address, then the firm, and then you're going to sign it here for us. Okay. So now that's your listing agreement. And again, you may or may not have some of these addendas agreements that we've gone through. Now let's go down and take a look at the property disclosure condition report. And that's this one right here. This was updated just recently, just in a couple of places, nothing major. But they occasionally will change the wording in a paragraph, which in this one they did. They changed the words and they added this right here, the Code of Laws, Title 27, Chapter 50, Article 1. That was one of the things that they added. The property condition report, as I said, sometimes they refer to it as the CDS. I can't say TDS, CDS. I say CVS. I've been going to the pharmacy too much. When I say CDS, it comes out CVS. But those are the initials they often refer to the property disclosure with. In the same manner as you do in your North Carolina, you would have yes or no and no representation. Again, similar to North Carolina, there are some exemptions, and the exemptions are similar from the standpoint it's a foreclosure, an estate, new construction, or family member living in the property. So you might want to, even when you're going through all this paperwork, if it's one of those categories, then you can tell the seller they looked at they don't have to present or provide this for buyers. I think this is kind of interesting. This is a little more strict than North Carolina. It says if a question is answered, no representation for any question, the owner is stating the owner is making no representation regarding the conditions or characteristics of the property, but owner still may have a duty to disclose information that is known or should have been known. So that's a little bit different on the North Carolina side. It says if you don't want to disclose it, you don't have to disclose it, whether you know it or not. I guess they're saying we don't have the right to make you disclose something if you choose not to disclose it. Of course, that's where you get into a lot of legal problems, but it's your right to not disclose it. They're making it a little bit more strict right here, where the owner still may have a duty to disclose information that is known or should have been known. So you want to point that out, that even though they might have the right or may choose no representation, they still have a duty to disclose. Disclosure is a really big issue, and you're going to hear me say it more than once. If you're going to err on the side of too much disclosure rather than minimal disclosure. And most often a seller is not going to want to disclose some things, but you have a responsibility to disclose that. Then let's go down here. Anything that's particularly a material fact. Owner must provide a completed disclosure statement prior to the time the owner and the purchaser sign a real estate contract. How many years have we had to wait to get a disclosure statement, even after we present an offer? And particularly in this fast market, when we've been seeing properties go into contract before we ever knew they were available. But each of our states have told us that it is the thing that needs to be done is that they see the disclosure, the property disclosure, prior to even writing the offer, but certainly before both parties sign to make it a contract. Okay, so I think that one of the nicest things that's happened in a long time is the trend now is to be able to attach the property disclosures in your MLS. So when you go to look at the data, you print out that data sheet on the property, go right to those attachments, and you should see a property disclosure. If you don't, before I even pulled out a form to write it, I would be calling that listing agent and say, where's the property disclosure? We need this now. I forgot now, not too long ago, one of the young men called me and he said, what do you do if you call the listing agent and the listing agent says, well, he promised he'd get it to me sometime this week. I said, well, you've got your work cut out for you working with that agent, I got to tell you. But just impress upon him on page 1 here of the disclosure, it needs to be presented to the buyer prior to it going under contract. There is not a 3-day right of rescission in the South Carolina property disclosure like there is in North Carolina. Let's see. Here you're going to, now let me show you that this is interesting. Where it says page 1 of 5. Okay, we got page 1 of 5. We got page 2 of 5. We got page 3 of 5. We got page 4 of 5. We've got page 5 of 5. And voila, there's another page with no number on it. I do not know why they did not put a number on it. The theory is that this is an addendum that only explains about the HOA. It tells what benefits the HOA provides. It's an addendum to the first 5 pages, but it doesn't have a number. So they decided just include it in case you needed it. All right. If the property is in a neighborhood that has an HOA, then you're going to need this form. So out of convenience, this addendum was put into the form that has 5 pages. So don't get confused. We've laughed about that more than once, I got to tell you. So you might want to take that into consideration. Now, right up here, I told you it's just recently changed. What changed? What was last year? Right here. Okay. It says whether the property is subject to governance of a homeowners association, which carries certain rights and obligations that may limit the use of this property and involve financial obligations. If there is an HOA, then obviously you're going to check yes. You see the asterisk? If yes, owner must complete the attached residential property disclosure addendum. And that's when they added, just made it available. It's really for convenience. Okay. All right. Now let's go back up here to kind of work our way through a little bit on some of this stuff of the property disclosure. One of the first things that they put on the property disclosure has to do with the water supply and the sanitary sewage disposal system. And you know how we are at Keller Williams Ballantine about the septic and sewer and water disclosure, the one that I have you do as a verification as an agent. They put it right up front for you to deal with, for the seller to deal with from the first. And what we do with that form is to verify what the seller has said, because sometimes the sellers get confused. So we want to, we have to do the verification form. But I think it's really important that they put it number one, because it certainly is a number one issue with us these days. You want to disclose whether or not the water comes from the county or city, whether it's private, which will, or if it's corporate, community, or a well. All right, so you've got that for which your water source, and your disposal system would be the septic or sewer, which are, again, is what we address in our verification form. But you want the seller to tell you too. All right. Now the water pipes, sometimes people don't know what they are, and if they don't, they can check this, you know, if they honestly do not know. Sometimes it looks like it's one type of pipe underneath the sink, another type, it might be throughout the house, might be a different pipe. The thing you might want to watch for here particularly is the polybutylene, and or some brands of PEX. Okay, polybutylene was a real problem maybe 20 years ago. There was a big class action suit. A lot of houses had to be replumbed. Mine was one of them, where the clamps would break and water went everywhere, obviously. And so the polybutylene pipes, all those companies went out of business, and they were replaced by a product called PEX, P-A-E-X. PEX has been very durable. It's been a good product for many years, except some brands of PEX. So you might want to make sure that if your seller knows it's PEX, they don't specify a brand. But get your seller to designate if they know. If they don't know, they just don't know. The inspector is going to tell them what it is. Okay. Chimneys and floors and foundations, the roof system. This was another change not too long ago. The current roof was installed. If the seller knows when it was installed, obviously we want to put it in here. It more than likely going to be the year it was built, and whatever year is built, you're going to put in here, right? Now, right here is whether or not the seller knows if they've done anything to the roof. If they've done anything, had any repairs done to the roof, then they surely should have an invoice or something that would indicate who did it and when it was done. Be very cautious with sellers who say, well, I have a new roof. Well, when was it put on? Oh, a year ago. And then you get the invoice and it was 4 or 5 years ago. If you hear the word new, it's not that you don't want to trust the seller, but it's like, you got to drill deep, keep those questions, find out when, who did it, what was done. Same thing with an HVAC system. Often they'll say, well, I have a new HVAC. And you find out they have a new air conditioner, but the furnace is 22 years old. And guess who gets to buy a furnace? So you want to make sure and be real careful, find out what they mean when they say new. I just got another car, and I would say I got a new car, but my car is 4 years old. It's new to me. It wasn't a new car. So say I have to keep that same mentality when someone says new, it's new to them, and make sure that you qualify what part of it is new. Okay. So that, because obviously it could cause some serious problems when the inspector comes in and he said, well, this furnace is 22 years old. And but again, you try to gather as much information from the sellers with invoices. Even sometimes I would put in the MLS that invoices are available upon request, so that you have them or the seller has them, and you would make copies of them. But that just really substantiates the information and helps you in verifying before you're misrepresenting something out there. The plumbing system, obviously, the plumbing, electrical, look at there's that word appliance. Unlucky there. they have a lot of different appliances, like, and look, it has a washer and dryer. Is there any problem with them? Well, what if they're not even gonna leave them? You know, so you might want to drill down on some of these questions. And remember, you don't touch this. You don't put pencil to paper. The seller is the one who has to check these boxes, but you're the one that can ask the questions that will help him, or maybe answer some of his questions, or help him find the answer to some of the questions. And that's really, really important. And by the way, there's a product. I don't sell very many products that don't really, you know, it's either here or there, but there is a product that I really like. It's called Seller's Shield. If you think your seller is not knowledgeable or expressing full information on this disclosure, I would recommend that he fork out $199 and put Seller Shield on it, because if he fills out the form with Seller Shield, they will, if there's any problem or misrepresentation on it, they take care of all the legal expenses of it. So if you have any questions or want to look into it, just look up their website on Seller Shield. I highly recommend it. It's one of the few insurance, and it's affordable, that you might want to consider, along with a home warranty possibly. Okay. Again, I mentioned a while ago what I want you to do on the heating system and the cooling system. The heating system has to be an attached, a permanent heating. It cannot be something like a window unit. It can be a built-in unit, like a hotel, you know, where they have the units that are heat and air. It could be something like that, but for it to be heated square footage, make sure that it has ductwork to it, or it's a permanently affixed. Okay. Again, here's some more description on what type of HVAC is there. Wood destroying organisms or destroying insects. The South Carolina contract, which we'll talk about next week, has 3 contingencies that are outside or beyond the repairs. The repair contingencies went away. They only do the strict due diligence now. And when you're doing the due diligence can be for any or no reason. They change their mind when they have to pay the due diligence fee, which they call a termination fee, and they can get out of the contract. But what you want to be aware of, what made me think about it here, is there is the 3 outside of the repairs. One is the financing, one's appraisal, and one is the CL 100. That's the title of their termite report. And on that termite report, that CL 100, there is a section about moisture. And if you'll remember, the degree in North Carolina, they say anything under 1900, 19 degrees is acceptable. Anything over 19 degrees has to be remediated. It's not acceptable. In South Carolina, on the CL 100, it says 20 degrees. Anything less than 20 degrees is acceptable. Anything over 20 does have to be remediated. Now, that section is one of the contingencies that a buyer can get out of the contract on, but they cannot get out of the contract on the moisture that's created some damage in there. They can get out of the contract if the seller will not bring the moisture level down to below 20 degrees. Does that make sense? When they test it, and it's generally the termite inspector who does it, they go in and they check the moisture level. And if the moisture level is under 20 degrees and there's no termites, then you've got a clear CL 100. If either or both need to be remediated, then that's going to have to be remediated, and invoices shown to the buyer that it has been corrected before the buyer is required legally to buy the house. Okay. Now, right here, I would definitely want to make sure if there is a pest control treatment that has been done. Is there a bond on the property now? Who is the one who is supplying or backing the bond? So you want to get that information. You want to find out. Remember, and we're learning to not say everything's mold. Not everything is mold. Okay, we are having to learn how to use this of fungi, different types of fungi in the houses. So if the seller knows, they need to disclose it. And if there's any present infestations, which they're probably not going to admit or may not even know about, that's why they have the CL 100 done. This next section, boy, there's a lot of stuff in it. One of the things that you definitely want to be aware of is building codes, where there are permits. The main permit that you're going to hear me say loud and clear, make sure you get a septic permit. All right. You've got, if your seller doesn't have it, most of the time they don't, you find out what the permit says on the septic. Can the septic handle a 3-bedroom, or can it handle a 4-bedroom? And it's better be a pretty good size one if it's going to handle a 5 or 6 one. Okay. So make sure that if the seller doesn't have it or doesn't know, you be in touch with DHEC and get that permit. Any zoning laws or restrictive covenants, well, the restrictive covenants are going to be your CCRs. That if you're in a neighborhood that you're going to have an HOA, you need to have a copy of the CCRs. That's another thing that buyers need to see. Not too long ago, we were working with a couple that was going to buy a house, they wanted more than an acre. The gentleman, the buyer, was a truck driver, and he wanted to be able to put his rig out by his house. He didn't want to have to store it when he'd come home. And would you believe, in the CCRs in that neighborhood, although they were all over acre lots, there was something about not having any tractor trailers, either part in there. And we were so thankful that we had the CCRs attached to the listing. We read the CCRs even before we took the time to write the offer and negotiate it. So if you are going to be writing an offer on something, you want to make sure the buyer has it, but you also need to look through it. Every now and then, the height of a fence, there are certain dogs that can't be in certain neighborhoods. So there's some things that you need to scan, and you might not read word for word, but you be looking for it and knowing what they may be thinking about doing to the house. Look for do they have to have an architectural review or not? That kind of thing. So you make sure you know enough to guide them, a buyer, when from the CCRs, and you can't do it if you don't have them. Most sellers can get a free copy by going to their homeowners website, property managers websites, because they pay dues. They can get them free. So ask your seller to go ahead and get those and provide them for you, so that you can provide them on MLS. It really is helpful. Easements. Oh my goodness, easements. And private roads, or shared private drives, or shared private roads that have to have a road maintenance agreement for most loans these days. So if you have any inclination that that house might be on a road that's shared by maybe family members. Out here in Mint Hill, I live near the Mint Hill Matthews line, and we have a lot of little neighborhoods that are, there were family neighborhoods. There might be 4 or 5 houses and have a nice little, sometimes it's paved, sometimes it's gravel, but it's served the families all these years, and when they have a problem, they just fix it, whatever. I don't know exactly how they'd work it out, but if you're going to get a loan on that property, you're going to have a shared road maintenance agreement, and that's not always easy to get. So you might want to talk about that with the seller. If you're on a shared road that's private, you're going to have to get a private road maintenance agreement. The attorney has to draft it, but the seller and you as the agent get to go door to door and get signatures. So just be conscious of that. Every now and then they might be in a neighborhood that has a lawsuit going on against the HOA, or the HOA may have a lawsuit going against a contractor or something. Sometimes in condominiums, maybe something, we had one not too long ago where the decks were falling, and so they obviously had a lawsuit. HOA had a lawsuit against the contractor. So if the seller knows of any lawsuit, go ahead and discuss it up front and disclose it, because that's a material fact, and it needs to be at least the buyer needs to know that that's going on. Let's see, flood insurance covering the property. The flood insurance is a separate insurance that's over and above their homeowners. All right. The homeowners insurance is generally paid on a monthly basis, and it's often taken out of an escrow account that goes with their mortgage. That's typically what most homeowners deal with. But there is a separate insurance that's called a flood insurance, and that right now is offered through FEMA. There's a real big push in the government for the government to not be offering that FEMA insurance. They want the private insurance company to assume that, but the private insurance company say, we don't want that ball, because there's a lot of expense that goes into that. So for now, it's still a federal program, and it is paid as a separate bill for an annual bill. It's not terribly expensive considering what you get for it, but if the property is in a floodplain, they are not required automatically to have flood insurance. The house, if an inch of it touches the floodplain, they would be required to have flood insurance. And sometimes the mortgage company would say to the prospective buyer that they did require flood insurance. And in order to determine that, what they have to do is they have to get a surveyor to go out and do an elevation certificate to determine the elevation and make sure that there's none of the house. And again, that's totally up to the buyer. If it's not, they may still choose to get the flood insurance, but they wouldn't be required to. So kind of make them a little bit aware of that. And right here, if for whatever reason they filed a claim with FEMA, they need to notate it here. My daughter lives down in the Columbia, Lexington area. They had a real bad flooding a couple of years ago. I mean, excessive flooding and very unexpected. And so many of those properties did not have flood insurance. It wasn't required. It was just totally expected. And so many people lost their homes and lost so many things. So make sure you take flooding seriously and help your seller too as well. Now, right here, the Department of Motor Vehicles titled manufactured housing on the property. If there is a mobile home or manufactured home, those are synonymous terms, on the property, you must find the VIN, vehicle identification number, and find out from the DMV if that VIN number has been detitled. If it still has a title on it, it can still be moved, and it's more like a car. It's not a stationary home, and you cannot sell it because you can't sell cars. All right. You sell land, and you sell what's attached to the land. If it is attached to the land, typically it's going to have a permanent foundation on it, whether it's concrete or brick or whatever. It will have the tongue taken off of it. But the most critical thing is that it is detitled with the DMV. Then it can be sold as a residence, and you can represent the seller on it. So make sure the seller either knows about it, or again, you verify and make sure that that's done. This next section has to do with the oil tanks, gas tanks, lead-based paint, lead hazards, asbestos, radon gas. For many years, we never knew anything about radon gas, and even asbestos hasn't been a big issue in the last few years, but it has become an issue in the last, I would say, last 2 or 3 years. We're seeing many more properties being exposed to the asbestos, and just like lead, if it's not disturbed, it doesn't bother anything. There's asbestos maybe underneath the vinyl floor in the kitchen or bath or whatever. If you just keep putting something on, another layer on top of it, then it doesn't disturb it and doesn't harm anything. But if they start having to rip that out, then that has to be handled as a dangerous chemical reaction in your body. So you have to have hazmat uniform to go in and deal with it. So be aware that there are some issues with asbestos, radon gas, same thing. There's next week, I'll give you some folders and things on both of those that you can share with your clients. But right now, you're just getting your seller to disclose if he or she knows anything about it. Okay, that maybe is hazardous materials. This is an interesting thing in this section. We do not have this in North Carolina. The rental, is it a rental? Is it a vacation rental? Is it what, long-term lease? Is there a lease? Is there a lease anticipated? You need to put the information here and provide a copy. Okay. Again, and to itemize any costs that the tenant would owe. The existence of a meter conservation charge. I don't know if this is not part of our disclosure in North Carolina, but it is something they may need to know. So they may not know why their air conditioning cuts off and when it's 110 degrees outside, because they're already in our program that would allow the conservation of the air at those peak hours. So just make sure if that is on the property that they disclose it, okay, and see in what manner it's on the property. And we just disclosed a minute ago about the homeowners association. And this right here, if yes is to any of these above descriptions, that they actually do give a little bit fuller explanation of it. And again, I encourage you to say invoices available upon request. You don't have to put them on MLS, but make them available. This is an interesting page as well, where the current status of the property is owner occupied, leased, short sale, foreclosure, bankruptcy, estate, vacant, or other. Isn't that an interesting thing to add in the property disclosure? But it's there, okay? So take note of it. And this is where you're going to see if there's that HOA addendum. You're going to check is or is not completed and attached, the owner's signature. And look here, I think this is good. The purchaser acknowledges prior to signing this disclosure that they've received all of this. I think it would be great if they did, but I got to tell you, don't too many do it, because we see a lot of signatures on there and then they're needing some of this stuff. But let the seller know that the purchaser has a right to have these things. If they don't have them and the seller signs, the purchaser signs it, they've just signed they've signed it knowingly because it's right above their signature. So it kind of gives you the list of things that the seller needs to provide. And here's your little addendum again on your HOA, where your charges, is it monthly or is it quarterly or even annually? Okay, put per year or whatever here, and a contact information, whether it's HOA president or if it's a property manager, whoever a buyer would need to be in contact with. And you also, it's not on here, but you also want to find out if there's a transfer fee. For a while there, we were seeing transfer fees going up like $400. And then North Carolina came back and they said, no, it can't be more than $200. And recently I heard there was no charge. So just be cautious of what the transfer fee is, transferring from the current owner to a new owner. And you can see the list here is pretty standard and pretty similar to what you would be, you would be used to. Now, the flood insurance disclosure, this is a form I would go ahead and give to the seller. This again explains a little bit what you and I talked about a while ago. And here's some good websites for them to go to so that they know about it. And you're going to definitely want a buyer to have this, but I would like for you to give it to the seller so they know what the buyer is going to be looking for. And this one, oh, this has come up recently. We have an awful lot of properties that are in 55, or they call them active adults. And you can't put those words in the description or the remarks in MLS. You can't even use the word active adult because it kind of is synonymous to 55 and older. It's active adult. And every listing, even if you've had 5 yourself in that Sun City, let's say, every listing has to have this form signed and turned in with the listing, or you're going to get fined. You're getting dinged. Okay. Now, right here is you'll fill out the information here, but you have to have somebody that's going to certify a certifying party title, the signature, and the date. And here's a witness. You can be the witness, but you can't sign all this other stuff. This has to be somebody like a board member, or it could be a property manager, it could be an on-site person, but somebody who has the authority to sign on behalf to verify that it is continued to be a HUD protected 55 and older active adult community. So they say because you could lose that certification any day, don't know exactly what it would take to lose it, but if it at any time they lost that certification, then that's why they wanted every single listing to have it. So make sure you're familiar with that form, because there's a lot of 55 and older active adult communities on the South Carolina side, because you got your Sun City and Carolina Lakes and Four Seasons, and there's another one out there that I'm thinking of. So you've got several. So make sure you're familiar with that form. And this is the verification or agent discovery form that we've introduced to you the last couple of years. And I've saved a bunch of you some money. I tell you, or some of you some bunch of money, may I put it that way. Make sure that you are familiar with this form and use it. Don't get too hung up on it. Just if they have city county, you call the city county and you verify that it is available and it's not connected, or it is connected. The important thing on both of these things, sometimes it's not available. And if a buyer wants to buy a house and thinks they will connect, if it's not available to be connected to, then that's a material fact the buyer needs to know. Let's say it is available. Then maybe it comes into a neighborhood. I sold a house a few years ago for a friend of mine, a neighborhood not too far from here, that they came through with the sewer lines and she opted not to connect. She decided she had any trouble with her septic, so why would she pay the tap fee and the fee to connect? So she didn't. And then when I start trying to sell the house, all of a sudden all the other houses in there appeared that had been in listings, had connected. And I almost got caught on that, because she finally told me, she said, well, I decided it was too much money for me at the time. And so I didn't. So there are pockets of their neighborhoods that the city has now brought sewer lines into, that some are going to be connected and some are not. So that's what I wanted you to make sure to put. Is it available or not available? If it's available, is it connected or is it not connected? And that would go for the water as well as the sewer. Okay. And when you call, I want you to get the name of the person, and they're trying to give you first name. It's Trudy or Veronica, whatever, and put right here at the city county provider, Union County. or Mecklenburg County, wherever, do not put seller. That is not a utility provider. One of my little fellows put seller one time. I was about ready to snatch his bald headed. Make sure you put here who you talk to and where you talk to them. Again, that's protecting you and your pocketbook, not me and mine, okay? Sometimes you'll find out there's community services. There's not very many left. Kannapolis is still a community, would you believe? Kannapolis is still a community service septic sewer, okay? Now, right here, if it's a private septic system, you need to call the Environmental Health Services Department of the county that it's located in. The Environmental Services Department is the DHEC in South Carolina. So you want to, again, that's who you want to talk to. You're not going to call the utility department. You're going to call to get the permit. You have to get it from this department. And here's the name of the county. If you do have a permit, you want to make sure how many bedrooms is shown, because if the permit says 3, you cannot advertise it as 4. I don't care if the seller did buy it as 4. You cannot advertise it as 4 because that's misrepresentation. All right. So that has to be disclosed to the buyer. And then down here, if you initial here, if you have received a copy, check here. If there's not one available, it's my understanding that we've been misled by some of these county environmental health services departments. They've been telling us they're not available beyond 6 years. The states say that the septic permit is to be on file as long as that septic is in use, which they cannot determine that it's not used in 6 years. So don't let them bluff you. They need to find that septic permit. But again, you've got to call the right department. You can't just call the utility. You've got to call the environmental health department. And now all the other building permits, they generally don't keep them on hand how long of the 6 years. Now, whether some of the counties have been doing illegally disposing or archiving these permits, I don't know. I'm not gonna fight that battle, but question it when you talk to them. Make sure that it's your understanding for the state that they are supposed to keep those on record. So when you fill out this form, if you're the listing agent, and we're talking to you as a listing agent today, all you have to do is sign right here. You do not have to get a buyer's signature. You do not have to get the buyer's agent's signature. This is you verifying so that you can advertise accurately, okay? If you, however, are the buyer's agent, then I would want you to sign here. And then I do want you to have the buyer sign so that we have proof that you told them that that service was available, but it wasn't connected or whatever you found out, okay? Now the next form, that just explained what I just explained to you on that form. Professional services disclosure. If you'll give me a couple more minutes, I just want to show you this. We have a professional services disclosure in North Carolina. And again, the Bickett in Fort Mill had this one designed. It is really critically important that you talk to the seller and help the seller to understand what services are going to be performed, most likely in his house. Getting the seller to sign this professional services disclosure is not required. There's very few services that a seller would be required to put on here, but I want you to show it to the seller so the seller knows that the buyer is going to be choosing many of these services so he can kind of get prepared. If you want to get him to sign it, I think that's fine. But by and large, this is basically information. It's kind of like that dual agency addendum. You give it to them, so they know what's going to happen, but they won't be. One of the things I wanted to draw your attention to is this right here, the surveys. If a seller has a survey, try to get a copy of it. It's not that a buyer can rely on it, but hopefully he might have something that will show an encroachment, or he might show an easement, or might not show an easement. One of our own agents right now is in the sticky mess buying a lot himself, where there was an easement that wasn't disclosed. And so he's really had his hands full trying to work that out. So if there is a survey, you might want to make it available. Again, the buyer has to get their own survey or have to get that one updated, but at least it'll give you a little bit of understanding if there is an encroachment. And you might look on the survey and it doesn't say anything about that shed that's looks like it might be over in your seller's yard from the neighbor's side, or vice versa. They just, again, get as much information as you can, because you're the one that's going to be having to share it. And on the home warranties, I always recommend that a seller have a home warranty. The seller has the benefit of home warranty. Now, it wasn't so important during this time when the houses were selling in 2 days, but as we're going back to a more balanced market, it's kind of nice for the seller to have the home warranty on their own property while it's listed, because sometimes that inspection report comes back to something that can be fixed with a home warranty, and they have that coverage. So you don't have to sell it. Give them a copy of the home warranty brochure. They're digitized now, and you can send them on, in your e-signature programs. It's fine to do that, and let them talk to a home warranty rep, because if they have an interest, buyers are probably swinging back now to wanting to have a home warranty provided. They're not quite there yet, but that's where we're headed most likely with the buyer's balanced market. So just be aware of that. Now, the only other thing, the security system, make sure if there is a service on the seller's security system, help the seller to know that service has to be, that contract has to be worked out independently. We don't have anything to do with the service contract, but they may have to pay. We had one person that had to pay $495 because the buyer did not want to assume this service contract. The seller was not taking it to his next house because he was moving out of state. So he had to pay off or buy out of that contract. And that could be pretty much of a shock to a seller when they go to close, if they're going to closing and find out they've got to pay the security system service provider. So I just want to bring it to your attention, so you bring it to the seller's attention. Okay. It's not so much, again, some of these are just worksheets that help you to know the different things that you need to cover. And if you do get the information, I would highly suggest you providing it to the buyer. You do not have to get the buyer's signatures. You cannot require somebody in another company to fill this out or to sign it, because it's an in-house form. But again, right now we're the listing agent, and I want you to make the seller aware. Okay. Well, I've talked over my time, and you're very sweet to stay with me this time. If you want me to send you all this information, those forms, I'll be glad to do. Just put your email in the chat box, and I'll send it out to you. I sure have enjoyed spending some time with you ladies this afternoon. And my email is my full name at kw.com, or if you give me a call if I can help you in any way. And y'all have a good day.
Thank you for the information.
You're certainly welcome. Bye, y'all.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye now. Or do you have any questions before I go?
No, you covered everything. Yeah, you
and
covered
more,
everything.
didn't I?
Yeah, you did. I'm surprised you were able to keep going. I said, oh my goodness, her voice is going to give out. So yeah, you did. You covered everything extensively.
You're so sweet.
I appreciate it.
All right, loves. You take care.
Okay.
Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.